Hello, and welcome to another episode of Conscious Living, where we air every Wednesday at 6 p.m. on 100.5 FM CFRO Co-op Radio in Vancouver. And today, being spring and well into it, I'm really excited to introduce our guest, LoriAnn Bird. She's an Indigenous Métis herbalist, and she shares the ancestral wisdom of over 90 wild, edible, and medical plants from across North America. She helps us reclaim our natural rhythms and connections to the earth as we walk on it, because she feels and knows it's essential to our health and well-being, both as individuals and as a community. It's a simple way that we can appreciate, respect, and build our relationships around us. Welcome to the program, Lori. Always a pleasure to see you.
Oh my goodness, Mark, that was so beautiful. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here.
Well, it's always a pleasure to speak with you, Lori. And I remember when we first met a number of years ago when I got involved with the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference. And I remember you doing some walks with people in the local neighborhoods and showing them what most people would think are weeds, or not even knowing what the plants are. They're just plants out there that are all around us locally, and how they are edible, and they're used for medicine and all these great things of plants that, from the work we do in conscious living, from, plant medicine primarily being psychedelics, how so many other plants are medicine and they don't have to be psychoactive at all. So maybe you can start by telling us a little bit about your story and how you got involved in plant medicine, and how just these natural plants that are all around us are good for our health and well-being.
Thank you, Mark, for that question. Well, as a child, I was introduced to all of the native plants as we would walk up the back trails to Alice Lake. I was born on the lands of the Squamish people. And really, that's the beginning of an introduction. In my 20s, I was curious about, natural skincare, how to age gracefully. I started to study aromatherapy and worked at Gaia Gardens, a apothecary store here in the west side of Vancouver. And then I was invited to learn about plants, to learn more about the herbs. And so I studied with Don Olson with grassroots herbalism. And I practice these teachings, and with my two daughters. I have an 18-year-old and a 24-year-old daughter. So both of them grew up having plants as their medicines when they would get sick, a cold, the flu, stomach aches. I would always reach for my medicine bags or into my medicine books to find out how I could help them, assist them, to support the body. And then 12 years ago, the curriculum changed across Canada to include more Indigenous knowledge. And I saw that as an opportunity to really share, not just with my family, but with the community, and, help people to recognize as soon as we walk out the door, there's medicine there, there's food there, there is life growing around us that wants to support us so we can live long, strong, healthy lives.
Well, that was so beautifully said, Lori. And there's so much to really start unpacking from that, in just in regards to, I think you and I've had this conversation. I'll backtrack just a little bit about,
Mhm.
imagine if we actually put as much focus in growing some food and medicine and vegetables in our yards, instead of, that nice colonial lawn we all seem to cherish so much, and how much of a difference that would make in the world to people's health and wellness. So, with that being said, the one thing that really struck me, and this is where you and I got to know each other, when a mutual friend, an elder Fabio, came to town back
Mm.
in 2018, and he was sharing his work. And you had blown my mind just talking about, the things as simple as dandelion being
Mm.
a beautiful plant healer and plant medicine. when so many people think that it's just a weed, that it has so many powerful health benefits. So maybe, you can start by sharing about our common, because here we're airing here live in the neighborhood of Vancouver. Maybe you can share some of the taken for granted plants that we could use for medicine and for food, for that matter.
Mm. Well, Mark, what I've been really thinking about since 2020 is our vulnerability. So one with our gut health and the other with our food security. And, we spend a lot of water. We put a lot of water on our grass when we could be putting that on foods and medicines. And you bringing up the dandelion, which is a teacher, really, is teaching us how to be adaptable, how to be resilient, how to build our strength as we move ourselves into the future. There's so many unknowns right now. But the other piece that I really want to bring to people's attention is that there is a narrative around this plant that it's a weed, when we have to recognize it is a cultural plant to us who are of European background. So I'm of mixed ancestry. So I have my European grandfathers and my Indigenous grandmothers from here on Turtle Island. And to, think about, of course, when they were coming to these new lands, they were bringing those seeds with them. They were bringing their foods and medicines. And then during the Second World War, when we were producing poisons to kill people, after the war, those poisons were now redirected to these wild weeds, these plants that we don't want to have in our neighborhood, that we don't want to have in our lawn. And so I've been really reminding everyone, if we put poison on the earth, then we're poisoning ourselves, and that we want to reclaim. That's what this book is about. It's that reclaiming. Who are your own, ancestral medicines and foods? And dandelion offers so much nutrition. It's a good guest to the land. It's a pollinator plant. It has medicine. It's bringing minerals up from the earth, and that's bringing it to the surface for other plants. So then we can now receive those minerals for ourselves, so that we keep this body strong and healthy. We're not finding that profile of nutritional value in the foods that we're actually growing.
Mm. So why do you think they chose, if you speak about the dandelion specifically, why do you think they chose to do away with that as a weed versus recognizing it for the nutritional power pack of a plant that it is?
Well, I'd only just be guessing, but it's a business. They've sold billions of dollars for the last 70 years of us putting poison on the earth. So, it's sort of like, what do you do with your warehouse full of poison? You're going to create a story around um, something like a plant, like dandelion, like chickweed, like plantain, other wild greens, stinging nettle, for example, even though that's one not necessarily being targeted with poisons that I know of, but it's very difficult to actually find here in this region. If I go outside of the city, I'm going to find it. But this is a plant that has always grown here. So we're moving out the native plants. We're bringing in ornamental plants. They're beautiful. I appreciate them, but they don't offer anything. They don't offer food for insects. We need those insects so we have birds. We're taking away the wild habitat. Um, you know, we we live in relations not only to plants but with animals, with insects, with the mountains, with the water. So it's really more of a holistic approach to how we move ourselves and how our ancestors have always walked. These are not new plants. These are what we've eaten for centuries and centuries.
Yes, I can appreciate what you're saying there. And, when we think about the power of a number of these plants, and what strikes me is you talking about poisoning the earth, for one, and then the balance of the ecosystem that nature, there's a divine plan, in my opinion
Mm.
and experience and my belief system, that creates this balance for our planet that is, whether we may not agree with it or understand it or even be aware of it, though I believe that Mother Nature has its own balance. And every time we keep, you know, destroying parts of the earth and doing things from an unnatural perspective, that it affects that balance. And, you're speaking birds, insects, and we know that just based on the story of the humble bee, you know, and having the plants for these pollinators to go do what they need to do to perpetuate the species of all plants. So what else is out there? You've got your book, I know, is coming out, Revered Roots. I'm so proud of you to have gotten this all done and published and ready to go out to the public. I know that you mentioned over 90 plants in that book. What do you think is the most important thing for people to know from your book? Because I know that, we could talk about this for hours and go through each individual,
Mm.
but what's the most important things that we need to know, be aware of, and how can we take this information to create a better life for not just ourselves, but for everybody around us?
Hmm. Good question, Mark. So, in the beginning of the book, what I did was I did some, they're not chapters, they're really just a little conversation to think about what is our role as the humans? What is our responsibility? How do we build right relationships, not only with each other's, but all of our relations, all of these beautiful creatures, all of these teachers, and how do we do an honorable harvest? So, how do we only take what we need and then maybe collect some seeds and share those seeds and, make sure those patches continue to thrive? And then there's the reciprocity. I take care of what takes care of me. I receive these gifts with gratitude, and in that exchange, I make sure that I pass on this knowledge. Bruce Damier, I remember meeting Bruce and him talking about Darwin saying survival of the fittest, and how he, and his view, Bruce's view, what he was meaning, that we pass on knowledge from one generation to the next. And the reason you and I are here is because that's exactly what our ancestors did. They were eating these plants, they were finding the medicines, they were, sharing that knowledge so we could be here.
Wow, yeah, Bruce Damer, he's a pretty brilliant man, that's for sure. So within this, what have geez, I don't even know where to go with this because there's so much. I guess my question being is,
Mm.
what do we need to do as humanity, and how can we um, act as an individual to begin with, in terms of being a steward to, you know, really share this knowledge? Part of it is by doing a program like this, and raising curiosity at the very least, so people can, maybe be spurred to learn more. But what is it that we need to do as humanity in this case? Because, there's so much kind of going crazy in the world today, and I think health is the fundamental priority. It's what we've got. Without our time and health, we don't have anything, right?
Yeah, what I've been really thinking about since 2020 is about growing food. I've been thinking about collecting the water. How do we redesign our landscape, in particular our urban landscape? And really, we should be considering about 50% of our urban landscape to be wild. Thinking about harvesting corridors, whether that's on the edges of parks, in the schoolyards, down back alleys. So we're not going in the forest. We're not taking away food from our other relatives, and that we're having that local, that it's in this, within our locale, because those microorganisms that are in the earth that we're eating as we're taking up fresh, dandelion or even carrots, fresh carrots, then we're putting those microorganisms in our gut, which helps us to be stronger, to defend ourselves against pathogens. Pathogens exist in the forest, they exist in the human family. So growing the food is one, securing the water, collecting the water, really understanding how we leave the leaf on the earth, just like the forest does. We pile it into the garden to hold the water, creating habitat. And then the other thought that's really on my mind is to really think about tree nurseries. So our grandmother trees, our mother trees, as they drop their seeds, that she is doing her best to ensure that next generation, because we've been having so many droughts here in the last couple years, that the trees are really, really stressed. And when they go through that period, what they start to do is produce a lot of cones or lots of seeds to ensure the next generation. So we want to, bring back more trees. So we have lots of water, we have rain, we have shade, we have good oxygen, we have fuel for the future. We have beauty, we have a habitat, we have life. And one last thing I just want to say also, Mark, is that, to recognize that we are a living organism that follows cycles. We follow the season. And I was just reminded today by Bridget Mars, who, I believe she's come to the conference. And then yes. So she's just written a book on dandelion. So, if you want to know more about specifically dandelion, I'd highly recommend her book. And one of my Indigenous friends on Facebook today was talking about, the maple blossoms are out, the stinging nettle is out, the new shoots are out. So that it's that reminder, we eat through the season. That's who we are.
So in you saying that, do you believe that there's truth to what some people would say, that, we eat through the seasons, we also eat towards what's available in our area? So, if we're in the middle of winter here in Canada and it's, 10, 20, 30 below wherever we are, to eat pineapple and bananas and all those tropical fruits, is that a myth, or is there some truth to that ideally we shouldn't be eating those things because of their sugar content and so forth?
Well, there's a huge environmental impact when we are moving food all over the planet. And trust me, I love pineapple as everybody else does. I often think that, like if I go traveling, I'm eating the food of the culture that I'm going to visit. So when I'm in Ecuador visiting Flavio, he is foraging, or we are finding those foods that are from the local place. The What I notice here is we're not eating the local foods. We're not eating the wild berries, the salal and the Oregon grape and the salmonberry and the thimbleberry. And then my thought is, if I'm eating those foods, how does it change me? How does it impact me? Does it make me feel more connected to the earth or this place that I'm calling my home here in Vancouver? Like, how does it anchor me? How does it inform me? So, yeah, and the other thing is, like you mentioned, all those fruits in the wintertime, that's a lot of sweetness, a lot of vitamin C, when really we should be eating the carbohydrates, the rooted vegetables. And what carbohydrates do is they activate the sugars that help to store the fats. So we actually bulk up in the winter time to take us through the winter. And then after the winter, as the spring greens come, we start eating those again. And then in the summer, we're eating the fruits. Now, sugar in fruits, in particular berries, is where we find our minerals.
Mhm.
So we need those minerals for our endocrine system. That's our hormones. And so for the body to function properly, again, we need to follow the sun, and we need to follow what they're offering within the season. And then when the winter comes, we're now back into the rooted nations, or the rooted vegetables. So that's how our ancestors ate. I think we're also overeating. We have a Canada Foods Guide that's telling us 3 meals a day and 5 snacks. And when I really started looking at my genealogy and my culture, we ate 1 meal a day. So I've been really shifting how much that I'm eating, and really thinking about, okay, it's the seasonal. Now I can start the stinging nettles again, and then really revitalize my body.
I like what you're saying there about the 3 meals and 5 snacks. That's a lot of food in a day in my book. And I got to be honest with you, I'm down to pretty much one main meal a day. If I'm hungry, I eat. I don't eat just because, it's time or it's noon,
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
lunchtime or breakfast time. I remember reading a book years ago by a guy named Wallace Wattles. I think it was from the early 1900s. And he was talking about don't eat until you have an earned hunger. Like
Mm.
you didn't do anything and you're not hungry. Don't eat. Don't eat just because it's there. And I think, it kind of relates to what you were saying, that how we overeat as a culture, especially in North America, with this plenty. There's lots of it, and we just, and for most people, I learned that so much food that we consume from a standard supermarket doesn't have a lot of nutritional value left in it by the time that it gets, like you were saying, shipped from different parts of the world up here. It's always picked prematurely so it can ripen on the way. So many different things. And I so feel that it's important that we get back to, growing our own food. Imagine if everybody grew their own food or something. If everybody had a garden plot and neighbors shared the different things from their harvest, it'd be a very interestingly different world, right?
Mm-hmm. We'd get to know our neighbors. We get to share that abundance. And a few years ago, I heard a conversation happening on the radio about when we went into crisis during the war. People started to build their gardens, victory gardens. They were referred to as victory gardens. And we're in a crisis again. We are moving so much all over the planet, when we can, really start to think about self-reliance, self-sufficiency, sovereignty. Like, that's one of the things that I'm really walking towards, is to how that might feel like my ancestors felt, being sovereign. That it's like, I'm responsible. I can take care of myself within a community. I don't want to do this by myself. I want to do this with others, right? I want to share that love of the gifts, but also of the labor. And something that I learned also, because I'm 62 now. I'm like, wow, I want to go until I'm 104. And so how do I do this? And understanding my own ecosystem. So for me to continue to activate those enzymes to help me to age slowly, gracefully, to age well, is I need to feel the cold. I need to feel my hunger. So thank you so much for that, Mark. And that's that passing on that knowledge, right? That we just eat when we're hungry. And the other is to physically move my body. So if we're remembering those, the cold, the hunger, and the physical, then hopefully, and again, there's never any guarantee that that's going to take me into living a long life. I'm so curious where we're going to be in 40 years, 5 years, 10 years. So let's keep celebrating these seasonal changes, these events, and then share what we know.
Absolutely. And you talk about the where was I going to go with it? It was where you were talking about, the cold, the hunger, and the body. It's to be aware of, the effects that, like, say, these foods have on us, so that we can actually, like, say, have that awareness, which is kind of the root of consciousness, is, the level of our awareness to our connectedness, and then the difference that these foods make as we eat them. What other, you know, I'm always curious, what other kind of plants that are local to us here in the Vancouver Lower Mainland area, Fraser Valley, wherever that might be, where people are listening, that we take for granted. We talked about the dandelion as an example, and it's funny because my grandfather, who was Dutch, told me something that his parents taught him, and I got to know my grandfather later on in life. And he said the one piece of advice his grandfather had given him and his parents had given him is always have a home where you can have a garden, that you have a yard. So, as you're talking about the wartime gardens, that you're always able to grow your own food, and you have that opportunity to do so, and to use everything. You talked about it earlier in the beginning of the conversation, of using all parts. It's even the Indigenous people with the animals and all of those things. There was no wastage. It was using it all. And I think that there's something that we need to do to get back to certainly being a lot more thoughtful into how we work with, all the foods that we eat, and be less wasteful, for sure. And be better stewards of the land. Which then comes me back full circle to my question, is what other plants do we take for granted that are just outside our door?
Well, purslane is one that we might find in that garden, and this is high in omega-3, so this is, feeding the brain. There is something known as pigweed, or it belongs to the amaranth family. I'm trying to think. Oh, lamb's quarter. It's like wild spinach. So, what I'm always reminding people is get curious who's growing outside your door. My teacher, Dawn, would say there's a good chance that's actually your medicine. The house that I had been living in for many years as I was raising my two daughters, there was a lot of lemon balm around the house. Lemon balm is very good for the nervous system. It's very good for the thyroid. If the thyroid is overactive, it makes beautiful teas. It's really calming for the stomach. And she is quite prolific. So that was a medicine that I was being told to actually use to help my thyroid. So, that curiosity of who we're seeing outside the door, I think is really important. I would say, make sure you identify the plant clearly, because lots of times there's lookalikes, and, I don't want people to get sick or start harvesting the wrong plant. And then every season, learn another plant. So within a year, you have 4 or 5 plants in your repertoire that you're feeling really comfortable with. And then, I'm a big proponent in us regenerating the land, us reconciling with the land. So as I mentioned earlier, throughout what I'm seeing anytime I travel anywhere here on Turtle Island, anywhere in North America, we've taken out a lot of the native plants, which has an impact on our other relatives. And what we might want to do is think about what is native to the region I live in that can be that nourishment for us, right? That we can show our appreciation, our gratitude for this lands and waters that we're calling our home. My home is the earth. It's not specific to a region. My home is the earth. There are no borders in my mind.
Well, that's a good one. It reminds me of a documentary I was introduced to by my friend Michael, who helps us with the tech on the program here for the live stream, where the documentary was called "The World Is My Country," and
Mm,
it was about a world with no borders, and how beautiful that would be to just have that much peace and trust in fellow man that you wouldn't have to do that, you know. And I think that there's maybe a time and a place. Now you had talked about what's going to be happening in 5-10 years. It is an interesting time, and we have the big scare of AI that people are talking about. Do you see any relation between something like AI, and is it beneficial to working with plants in a different way? Is it so counterintuitive that it's not even a discussion to be had because of the, from nature to artificial intelligence is quite the polar opposites, you would say. But is there a way that you see how the tool of artificial or augmented um, or assisted intelligence, if you want to change up the acronym a little
mm.
bit, to working with nature in a better way? Is there something there that you see as might be an opportunity, or is it just not in the cards as you see it?
Well, plants are spirits. They're sentient. They feel just like us. So, I don't actually see that in relationship with nature so much, the artificial intelligence. I think it's really fascinating, and again, it's another tool to play and do some creations, but it's not really living. It's a program. Now, that being said, I am also a program because I'm programmed with my language, I'm programmed with my ideology, my religion, and but it's in alignment and an attunement with my living world. And when we look at Indigenous ways of being, we have been witnessing for thousands and thousands of years. So, understanding our role within the ecosystem, right? We are living in a web. I am just one strand in this web. So, I need to remember what are those practices that help to keep my environment healthy, to keep my family healthy, because I can only be as healthy as my environment is. We are seeing a huge rise in so many diseases and illnesses that I didn't hear about when I was a child. Like, these weren't common. And this is what I'm sharing with the children. So I'm in elementary schools, high schools, universities, wherever I get invited. And, I'm letting them know our environment has become very toxic. So, AI, maybe it becomes a bit on the toxic side because it's not really in true alignment with our nature.
Got it. So why do you think our world's getting more toxic? Is it because of all these chemicals that you were speaking of in terms of pesticides, even something, we did a show about a month ago or so in regards to fluoride as well. These byproducts they don't know what to do with, and they put them into things that we consume to get rid of it. Um, do you think that we can create the change with good health, with cleaner, better foods, and how do we make that happen and influence that from our role?
Mm. Well, I always last year, or was it the year before? So, um, the word that came to me last year was model, right? Be the change you want to see in the world. So if I want to see that change, then I need to walk that. I need to walk my own talk, right? I feel like the word this year is transparency. So we need
Mm,
to be
okay.
transparent and and speak the truth for whatever that truth is for us. That helps us, to be in that alignment, is what I would say. And we're living in an artificial world now. And I will tell you, Mark, I've had these young children, grade 3, that have said to me, "Oh, Miss LoriAnn, it's fine. We're going to Mars." And I'm looking at their faces and they're serious. So I'm like, okay, that's fine if you make those choices, but understand where those choices are going to lead you. You're going to have to pay for water, you're going to have to pay for oxygen, you're going to live under the earth. You're most likely going to be a miner for minerals. It's not going to look like this. We're not going to hear the birds. So it's like that program to to be in an artificial environment is becoming the norm. And being in an artificial environment, I'm not getting the proper sunlight. I'm breathing in toxins because of the paint fumes or the new carpets. So you see, our nature is really to be outside. That's where our health is connected.
I love the reference, and you just made me think, as I start thinking about nature and human beings as a human animal and how important our environment is, when you're describing what life could be like on Mars and what you'd be doing, it's almost like taking a fish out of water and
Mm,
expecting it to, live on land, kind of a thing.
mm,
And
mm-hmm,
it's a very um non-natural perspective, if you choose to look at it that way, which leads me down the rabbit hole of extraterrestrial life and where do we really come from and where are we. There's so much you can go down in terms of into a rabbit hole on those topics. um but how do we get back in touch with nature? We want to have some tangible tools, and I think knowing the plants, like you were saying, outside your door and what's kind of growing naturally around you. And for me, I think it's about being curious and having those aha moments, and how we spend our money, the choices we make, be more conscious about what we're doing, where we're spending our time, our money, what we're putting into our bodies, and being aware again of what these big corporations are putting into our food.
mm. Yeah. Um, well, what I've been offering in the last couple years is some rewilding retreats. So I'm doing one here in the north, and then we'll be doing rewilding in the south with our good brother Flavio Sante. So, I think this idea or this experience of rewilding, walking in our bare feet, swimming or being in the cold water, seeing the night sky. I asked the children, I'm like, have you seen the Milky Way? And they're like, what's the Milky Way? Like, it's like that is that's intrinsic to who we are. All cultures on the planet have been watching the night sky. We know that from Egypt, the way the pyramids are set up in alignment with Orion. They're the moon cycles, how the moon affects us, in particular us women, right? These natural rhythms. So the rewilding is about meeting the plants, being introduced, learning how we can make some medicine. So I do 101 medicine making at the back of the book, right? How to make your tinctures, how to infuse your oils, how to make those, skincare products, how to nourish the body. And that we can do it here in the north, or we can do it down in the south.
Beautiful. You just you got me thinking when you talk about the stars, because I'm blessed to live a little outside of the city where I can actually see the stars in a beautifully better way, because there's not the glare of the city. And you know I've been walking barefoot now that it's nice outside, and just the fact that I'm able to connect with nature in a different way. And it gets me thinking again, you talk about Orion, how many people can't even name a constellation anymore? And then if you go back 100, 200, 300 years, and then to the beginning of time, how every culture navigated by the stars. It was their calendar, it was their map, it was their everything. And that's about getting back in touch with nature and then passing along the important information from generation to generation and generation, which includes, of course, what to eat and what not to eat specifically. Right.
Hmm. Yeah, no, be able to identify your poisonous plants as well, right? That, you really want to keep yourself safe and, get a good guidebook that's local to your area so that you can really identify, look for those characteristics. And, I love how the publisher and the team put this book together. A good friend of mine, Julia, who works out at BCIT, she's a head of the forestry department. She did the illustrations in the book. And there's space for you to add more because I can't tell you everything about the plants. This is not a textbook. It's not like a formula from each plant. I'm doing a formula base. I'm really giving you a story. I'm bringing an introduction to you. And through that play, you're going to learn more. You're going to find a recipe, add it into the book. Get your pencil, get your crayons, add that information in so that this can be passed on to future generations. I've had countless people say to me, I wish I'd written down what my grandmother told me. And someone in the group said, the plants remember. So remember that the information comes from them. It comes through our dreams. It comes through that asking that knowledge shows up for us, the guidance shows up for us. The plants love when we're outside. The birds love to hear us sing. The eagles come out in the playground when the children are out running around. Like everything is responding in a reciprocal way, both ways. Like I get to see that beautiful eagle and they're enjoying the laughter and the yelling that they hear with the children. So yeah, pick up a book. That's what I would say. Someone asked me the other day, Lori, what's the action we can take? I'm like, share this with others.
Yeah, I think the action part's always important. And, how do we inspire people to at the very least get curious so they can, create their own learning opportunities and their own distinctions and then choose their own actions as they move forward and possibly, hopefully, share it with others. I think that's always an important part of any equation because, you can just read a book. Yet, as you're describing, being interactive with your book and adding notes and circling and scribbling and adding your own journaling to it and recipes, as you say, is a brilliant idea to really take that knowledge and information that you've read and really bring it into part of your beingness, which I always think is an important part of any learning so that we can retain it even more. So, Lori, we're closing up on time. So I guess the next thing is if people are interested in what you're talking about in terms of using these natural, wild, and local plants, for food and for health and medicine, where can they find more information about you, your work, your book? Is your book now available? I know it was being released soon. How can people learn more about what it is you're doing?
Well, they can order from their local bookstore. I'm all about the local economy. Of course, you can order online. Yes, the book is available. I'm happy to report. I saw it on the BC ferries. People have been sending me photographs. It's in London Drugs right now, so it's
Oh,
not
wow.
just in the bookstores. So it's finding its way. I'm on Instagram at Earth and Company or LoriAnn Bird. My legal name is Lori Snyder, so I'm also on Facebook. I'm always posting events that my good sister Lara Cisneros and we host. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to be doing a rewilding retreat May long weekend. We're just confirming our location, and then in November, December, we'll be going down south to sit with two different communities there and doing some rewilding or what I would call rewilding, but also retreats, whether that's with some medicines, but also to go and meet and find those places where there's no Wi-Fi, there's no electricity. We have some really good friends in another community that is like a silent retreat. You know, for us to slow down, I think is really, really important that we balance our work with play, and that we just share our love, whatever that love is, so we inspire each other to walk a good life.
I love the no Wi-Fi, no electricity
Oh,
idea. You know, the opportunity to, unplug in that digital detox because we get so connected to our devices. And, you know, I remember the first day when I had internet years and years ago and it went down and oh my God, you can't get email. What do I do? And now it's like, thank God when I can't get email or get some messages, and how important that is because it takes a few days to really unwind and unplug and disconnect so that you can kind of really get comfortable with yourself again in nature.
mhm.
So
Yeah.
I love that, and I think it's a great exercise that everybody should do on a somewhat regular basis as well, because it really helps you get back to yourself, and that's a big part of it. Lori, I always am inspired every time we speak and when you're sharing your gifts and your wisdom and the passion you bring to what you're doing. And I encourage anyone, if you are interested, if you're inspired and curious about what we've been talking about here today, you can check out LoriAnn Speed's website or sorry, LoriAnn Bird. You got me confused with another LoriAnn we know. Great
Mhm.
and as she is, but LoriAnnBird.ca. You can get some more information there, catch up with all of her events. You can order her book, and ideally, you can learn more and see what's going on. And that's what we encourage people to do is to, when you listen to a program like this, if you get a nugget that makes you want to, do something different or curious, to take some action and to do something different. And Lori, you do such a great job of inspiring me to do so. So thank you for that.
And thank you so much, Mark. I always love our conversations, and yeah, just grateful to share. This is what I came to do, share what I love. So
Well, and
hopefully I get to meet some of the listeners at some of the events that will be planned around the city. So thank you.
yes, absolutely. And I encourage anyone, if you're interested, come and join Lori for one of her nature walks, because that's where, the rubber meets the road. That's where what we talk about here becomes real, because this is a conversation we're using technology and Wi-Fi and, radio waves and everything to get this message out there. However, when you actually go hang out with Lori for an afternoon and you walk through the forests and the parks and you see what it is she's talking about in terms of all of these plants and how they're all interrelated, that's the power that really drives it home. So I encourage you all to check out Lori's work. Again, the information is in the links down below or maybe to the side, depending where you're watching this at the time. But it's LoriAnnBird.ca. Lori, thanks again for being on the program.
Mm, beautiful. Thank you, Mark. Have a beautiful, beautiful afternoon. We'll connect
You
soon.
You too. So you've been listening to Conscious Living here on 100.5 FM CFRO Co-op Radio in Vancouver. My name is Marc Caron, and until next time, take care of each other, everyone.
Mm.